Hello, everyone. This is Denise from Activated Asana. And today I want to give you a quick presentation on a topic that is a hot button topic in the yoga world and something I get asked about an awful lot. So I just thought I'd make a presentation that kind of covers a lot of the questions that I get asked and just give you a bit more information so that if you are teaching hot yoga, practicing hot yoga, or offering as a studio owner hot yoga in your studio, you have a little bit more information that could help you make better choices. All right, so I'm not saying you should practice hot yoga or not practice hot yoga. Again, I'm just providing information, and you're welcome to challenge my comments in the comments below and tell me your stories. I'd be very interested to hear about your own personal experience with hot yoga if you have any. So let's get started. I've made a little slide presentation to share with you, and that will help me just really stay on track because there's all kinds of places we could go with this topic. All right, so let's just get all set up. So yeah, my topic is the truth about hot yoga. And I just feel so strongly about this. I feel that as teachers, as studio owners, we are leaders for our students. And I think it really is our responsibility to provide education and information that helps our students take better care of themselves. And that's kind of what it amounts to. Definitely in Activated Asana, that's what I'm teaching teachers how to do. And it's really based on good training principles and, the way our body adapts to the kind of stresses we put it through. Very important things to know. So we're going to basically look at the effects of hot yoga, what it actually does to the body systems and tissues, and whether or not that provides the kind of outcomes that the claims say that hot yoga gives us. So we'll have a look at that. So, let's first of all just sort of set up our mindset as teachers and people who lead others in a movement practice called yoga asana. And that is that, we have three main duties to our students. And that is, number one, to provide a safe space for the practice and safe on multiple levels. Number two, to provide guidance and education regarding the short and long-term effects of the practice and how to practice safely. And we should know how different practices affect the body and affect different body types, etc. So that to me amounts to full informed consent because our students are basically trusting us to guide them in a practice that is going to be good for them. I mean, right? That's what it's all about. It's not a competitive sport. It's not an art form, really. It's about doing something good for their body. That's what our students have come to do when they come to practice yoga. And the other one is to provide encouragement and support for our students that leads them toward positive outcomes, positive changes that they're trying to make in their body and away from injury. And, I find that this is not always happening. I find there is literally a reluctance to provide real information and education. And the same kind of marketing claims get repeated over and over again as though they're true, and nobody seems to challenge them, not even the teachers or the studio owners. So let's go there today, shall we? Now, first of all, I think it's important to address this one first issue, and that is hot yoga an ancient practice, and does that even matter? Because a lot of people will say, well, of course, hot yoga is how yoga is practiced. India is a very hot place. But, I would say, having done my training in India, that is kind of not true because yoga asana is practiced early in the morning or later in the evening after the heat of the day. So we actually avoid the hottest part of the day for asana practice. And that's because, well, of all the reasons that I'm going to give you as we go through this presentation. Now, there are certain hot practices that are done in the yoga system, but they're not asana practice. A sadhu might be in seated meditation and have, burning ashes all around him or other substances. And they are trying to, have a very intense experience and generally meditate through that. So their intention for that kind of practice is completely different from the students who come to a hot yoga class, whose intention is to do something good for their body, something healthful, something that will give them good outcomes and perhaps a more resilient body, better function, things like that. So, our students have some very specific goals in mind, and they're not the same as the yogis in India who are doing, the kind of practice that I described. So where does hot yoga come from then? Well, you probably have heard of Bikram Choudhury, and, there's lots of information that has come out about him, and he really is the originator of hot yoga. It was actually kind of born in his mind when he was teaching yoga teacher trainings in Japan, and he observed, and this was way back in the 1970s. So he observed his students enjoying sauna during their break times. And, he saw how much they enjoyed that. I would say, there's probably other attractions to having students practice in a hot room, but I'm not going to comment on that. But he started experimenting with bringing hotter temperatures into the practice. So having his students practice in more heat and humidity. And he started with around 28 degrees Celsius. I don't know exactly what that is in Fahrenheit, but that was, kind of closer to temperatures in India, we'll say. But right away, he observed that students sweated a lot more and they seemed to be exerting themselves more. So he continued raising the temperatures in these classes until it became like the standardized 40 degrees Celsius, or that's about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's kind of, typical for a Bikram style class. And a lot of people don't call their classes Bikram anymore. They just call it hot yoga, or maybe hot power yoga or something else. People have come up with different names to sort of distance themselves from Bikram himself. So that's kind of how it came about. Now, I feel that he made a very common mistake in his observation of what the students how they were experiencing the practice once he started really turning up the heat. He made a common mistake that's still being made today. And I'm going to get to the bottom of that. And I want you to know that I am including in the notes for this presentation some articles that you can follow up. One of them is this website where I'll share some information for you now, but I'll give you quite a few links you can go to and, just see some supporting information for the comments that I'm making here today. And you can, kind of follow up on that yourself. But according to a detailed article on the ThermoHuman website, which is a website that analyzes thermal information on human performance, we're looking at an article on exercising in extreme heat and the three major effects that it has. So again, these are body-wide effects, and they kind of overlap quite a lot. And we'll talk about some of the other implications that these particular effects have on tissues and stuff later. So first of all, we're looking at the circulatory system. Now, in extreme heat, which I think we can agree, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit is fairly extreme heat for exercising, okay? And there would be a humidity component to that too. So in that situation, blood flow is going to be redistributed to your vital organs and to the skin. Vital organs, because your body does never want to sacrifice the vital organs because it's trying to make you survive. And it's going to bring blood toward the skin in order to cool the blood, hopefully, so that the blood is closer to the body's surface where evaporation from sweating is happening. So that is actually supposed to cool the blood. Also, your blood is moved away from muscles and brain, right? So it's going more toward organs and skin, away from brain and muscles. So that's going to have some very serious effects downstream. Also, I want you to understand that, your body only has so much blood volume. You can't just on demand increase your blood volume so that all your systems have the blood that they need at every possible moment. No, your body is going to prioritize certain systems under certain conditions. And the condition of extreme heat is going to cause this effect on the circulatory system, where you're moving blood into the vital organs so you don't die, and into the skin so that, it might be able to cool the body down. Okay. Because, in order to maintain homeostasis, you have to maintain a certain thermoregulation, and that's what the body's trying to do. Body's always trying to help you. Okay. But it is moving blood away from muscles and brain. And you will find also lymphatic flow is accelerated by quite a bit. Now, that could be a good thing if you're kind of congested and all of that. But for some people, it is quite overwhelming for their lymphatic system. So that should be considered. Okay, number 2, the nervous system. It becomes difficult to mentally focus. Remember, blood is not getting to the brain in the same amount that it normally would. So it becomes difficult to mentally concentrate and focus. And you are definitely not going to be able to reach full contractile capacity in your muscles. So that means your muscles are just not going to be able to contract as hard, and they're going to fatigue a lot quicker. This is called perceived exertion. So we're going to look at that point in a little bit more detail, but we really notice that there's a reduction in nervous system arousal, which means that, your reaction time is slower, your muscles can't contract as hard, and you feel much more tired. Okay, so that's the effect on the nervous system. And then the muscular system has some major effects too. So you're actually going to, in extreme heat, you're going to use up energy stored in your muscles faster and produce more waste products, which, I suppose if you've got your lymphatic system elevated, maybe you can take care of that again if your body's in good condition. You're going to be creating greater mechanical stress overall on your body, possibly even existential stress, right? Because those of us who have practiced and taught in a very hot room, sometimes you wonder, like, if you can actually survive the heat. You can have that thought come through your mind, which can further inhibit neuromuscular response. So again, we just looked at the nervous system, what's happening there. And, your body is not going to let you overexert yourself in extreme conditions, because your body has all kinds of fail safes to make sure you don't kill yourself, so your body will shut things down before it allows you to go that far. So again, that's called, inhibition of the neuromuscular response, basically just shutting down your neuromuscular, not the connection, but the drive. You're not going to have the same drive. All right. So now I want to just say that a lot of these things you can adapt to a certain degree, but whether or not that would actually be good for you or not is another separate question. So, okay, we're going to keep expanding on this concept as we go along. Now, you might be somebody who loves hot yoga, and I don't want to wreck your day. If you love hot yoga, fine. You just need to understand, like, what are the effects and benefits of hot yoga? What's sort of real about the claims that are made about hot yoga? And what can I do for my body that helps me tolerate the extremes of hot yoga? Okay. So let's look at some of the bold claims that are made of hot yoga. And guys, I lifted these claims directly from websites of studios and teachers who are offering hot practices. So I didn't make these up myself at all. So it's just a topic that's surrounded by so many misconceptions and bogus marketing claims in the yoga world and beyond. So let's look at some of the most typical ones. Hot yoga builds more muscle. I'm sure you've heard that before. Hot yoga burns more calories, which is code for helps you lose fat, if you weren't aware of that. Hot yoga detoxifies the body. I mean, who has not heard that? Hot yoga makes your muscles looser and makes you more flexible. So we're going to look at each of these and just see, can that possibly be true? So let's look at the first one. Hot yoga builds more muscles. We'll look at the problem of perceived exertion here. So first, it's important that you understand this term perceived exertion if you've never heard it before. It's well known in the training world. And when I say the training world, I mean in sports performance or every, practice that's a physical discipline, which is what I see yoga as. There is an understanding of the concept of perceived exertion and how that might interfere with your performance. Okay. So it's a term that means Well, perceived exertion is like how we feel about how hard we're working. So it's how we evaluate ourselves for our level of fatigue and effort that we're putting into whatever activity that we happen to be doing. And the research is very clear that activity in high temperatures causes a marked increase in the level of perceived exertion. And that means that activity feels like it requires considerably more effort while causing a drop in muscle contractile strength, which we already looked at, and endurance, and with fatigue setting in sooner. So in other words, that amounts to, it's just easy to trick yourself into thinking you're working really hard. Okay. And that is like, I think you all have probably had an experience with that. So I want you to just imagine hiking. Like if you're hiking up a mountain and it's a nice cool day, you're just going to be no problem hiking up a mountain. But if it's like a 30 or 40-degree day, can you imagine hiking up a mountain? I mean, it would feel 10 times harder. Same mountain, same person, same backpack. It's going to feel so much harder. You know that yourself. It's going to feel like your legs are heavy and you can't get enough air, and it's just so stressful, and you'll want to quit. So that is perceived exertion. You feel like you're working 10 times harder than you would feel if it was just a nice cool day and you were hiking up a mountain. I'm sure we've all had an experience similar to that, some kind of experience we can apply to that. So yeah, it's a lot easier to think because like your muscles can't contract as hard. You don't have the same kind of mental focus. Your muscles are not getting the blood they need. Your brain isn't getting the blood it needs. So, there's lots of things happening in your body. These are real things. It's not going on in your mind that make you feel that increase in perceived exertion. Another claim that's made is hot yoga builds more muscle. So the problem of insufficient loading. So not only will you feel like you're working harder than you really are, and you're just surviving the heat. And when you're just surviving the heat, you simply cannot reach a level of active loading that would actually stimulate the adaptation response of building muscle, right? Here's something I got to say to you loud and clear, and that is heat and sweat do not build muscle. They have honestly nothing to do with building muscle. Only active loading builds muscle. Okay, they haven't developed a machine that will build muscle for you. I know they're trying really hard. You can't take a pill to build muscle for you. You can't take a vitamin or a supplement. You can't lie on an electric bed or something and build muscle. Okay, so far they have not found a way to build muscle except for active loading of the muscle. So you have to work your muscles. You have to contract your muscles. You have to use a stimulus greater than your ordinary stimulus to build muscle. Maintaining muscle, different story. But for building active muscle, and the claim is made that hot yoga helps you build more muscle, that is impossible because you simply cannot work your muscles as hard as you would need to make that kind of level of stimulus that would actually cause building muscle. Okay, so if you just can't actively load as much, building muscle is not going to happen. So that claim, hot yoga builds more muscle, unless you are loading sufficiently, that is not that you cannot make that claim. And as you can easily compare like how much harder you can work in a room temperature class versus a hot class. You would know right away that you're going to build more muscle if your muscle has the blood it needs, it has the energy available to it, and it can contract as hard as it needs to build muscle. That's how you're going to build muscle. All right, let's look at the next one. Hot yoga burns more calories, so it helps you lose fat. I mean, a lot of people think that, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, like, sweating does not burn a lot more calories, Yeah, sweating is just a cooling system. It's not a calorie burning system. You in fact burn more calories from shivering in the cold than you would from sweating in heat. So it's just not a system that burns up a bunch of energy. So, but working muscles burn calories. Okay. So this is the thing you need to understand. Working muscles are calorie burners. And if you can't work as hard, you're just not going to burn as many calories. And you won't build, like, again, this is the whole thing about building muscle. If you can build some more muscles, then you've got more metabolically active tissue, which is going to burn more calories all the time, even when you're not doing yoga or anything else, right? Even just building muscle burns a lot of calories, and then having more muscle on your body burns more calories, you see? So, I agree that you do want to burn calories to help you maintain a nice, healthy body mass index. But in order to do that, you need muscle. And as we've already talked about, it's very hard to build muscle when you fatigue so early. So there you go. That's what I have to say about burning more calories in hot yoga. And then a very common one too is that hot yoga detoxifies the body because you sweat out toxins. Now, yes, there is a lot of sweating going on in hot yoga, even before there's any movement going on. People just go into the room and lie on the mat or whatever they might do and start sweating. But sweat is not toxic, okay? And it's mainly just water, salt, and magnesium, and then some minute amounts of urea and, other things that might come out in the pores, but it's not a bunch of toxins, guys. It doesn't matter. You are not going to find anything but marketing claims that say that. You're not going to find good research that will say that. Sweating is just not an elimination system. It's not a detoxification system. That is not what a sweat gland is built to do. It just literally can't do that. It is a cooling system, not a excretion system. So, your liver and your kidneys are systems that filter and recycle and then eliminate well, we don't need to call them toxins. They'd be just things that your body doesn't need. And it does that through dumping them into the colon and the kidneys, and you eliminate them. That's your elimination system. Even the lymphatics they're not detoxifying the body. They're just filtering the blood. It's really the liver and the kidneys that are if you need to detoxify something, that's where it's going to happen. So sweating is a cooling system, and extreme heat and extended profuse sweating can actually impair your kidney function and overwhelm your lymphatic system and cause dehydration. So, you need to, like, if you're going to practice in extreme heat conditions, you really have to take care that you're not dehydrating yourself and that you're taking care of your body's systems. These are not things that you can see, but they are things that will make you feel a certain way, right? You might feel lightheaded or extremely fatigued or rather sick, especially if your kidneys become affected. So, these are real things you need to consider and make sure you know how to take care of yourself in that respect. That's kind of not the purpose of my talk today, though. One last claim here we're going to look at is hot yoga makes your muscles looser, which makes you more flexible. And, I get it. It does feel that way, but this is not a long-term effect. It's really just for the duration of the class or for a while after. And it doesn't actually make your muscles looser. Okay, we'll talk about what actually is happening in the muscles in just a moment. But you might find, after a hot class, you might actually feel stiffer after you cool off completely. And, so imagine that, you take a hot class and then hours later you get up from a sitting position or something, and you might feel very stiff at that point. If you live in a winter city and you take a hot class and then you drive home in the cold, you might actually feel stiffer the next day or 2 days later or something like that. And that's because you're going to be pushing your your joints into positions that they are not really well prepared for. And your body's going to let you do that because your proprioceptors, again, this is under your nervous system, your sensory receptors are not as sensitive to the position that you're going into. So it doesn't mount resistance to you going there. It's kind of like they're subdued or sort of drunk or something like that. And you're going to end up putting your body into positions that the tissues themselves are not prepared to go there, you know? So you can really stress your tissues and have no awareness of it at all until later when you feel stiffness or sort of inhibited in your muscle movements, or you might feel some concerning feelings, pain and stuff around your joints. So, you know, when you're in a hot class, it's kind of like your sensory receptors or the antennae of your body are kind of drunk. They're less accurate. They're much slower. They're just, whoa, you know, they're not sharp and fast and, you know, telling you exactly what's going on in your body. That's just not what's going on, and you can easily push your joints too far. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that too. So, you know, I think the whole concept of flexibility is so misunderstood, and not just in yoga, but I mean, it's definitely epidemic in yoga. Everybody seems to think that we all need to be more flexible, and there is actually no limit. We should be limitlessly flexible. And that is what's good for everybody. And that just could not be further from the truth. So, you know, people will often say, I mean, you hear it all the time. People will often say that they want flexible muscles. They want to be more flexible. They don't think they're flexible enough. So they say their muscles are just too tight. So maybe they need to be looser. You know, is that what they want? You know, can you imagine if your muscles were loose? What would that mean to your body? What does it mean to ask your muscles to get longer? You know, your muscles need to control and coordinate your movement. And if they're like literally, you know, stretched beyond recognition, they're not going to be able to do that. Even if you stretch aggressively over decades, you're not going to get the outcome that you think you're going to get. You're going to end up with unstable joints and probably damaged joints. And we know this because there are master teachers who were, you know, bright lights in the yoga world who've had to have their hips, joint replacement or reconstructive surgery, especially in their hip joints. I mean, it's terrible, but, you know, we didn't know what we didn't know. And, you know, we can look at lots of cases of people sort of misreading the cues that they're getting from their body, and they just keep practicing no matter what, regardless of how it feels. And then, you know, we end up in a hole that we didn't know we were digging. So, you know, let's just kind of look at what's going, like, how does movement even happen? So movement occurs at your joints, right? And it's comprised like movement. I'm not talking about passive stretching now, I'm talking about movement, being able to move around and do things. That happens as a combination of interdependent action between the nervous system, the muscular system, and the connective tissue systems. When we think about joints, that's kind of a connective tissue structure, multiple different types of connective tissue in a joint. So, you know, range of motion or movement without all those components coming together usually leads to poor outcomes. So you don't want to take your, you know, you don't want to tell your muscles to not interfere. I'm taking this joint as far as I can take it, and I don't want you to stop me, is kind of what you're doing. And your nervous system would be the thing, like it's acting through the muscles to stop you taking your joints too far, because, you know, your nervous system has a sense of what would be safe for you and what would not be safe for you. And it's going to put on the brakes if it thinks you're not safe. Now, there could be lots of reasons why your nervous system would think that. Maybe you are dehydrated. Maybe you had a previous injury in that position. Maybe it knows that your joint is unstable and it doesn't want you creating more instability. You know, so there are real reasons your nervous system would want to stop you from going into a particular position. And I think it's better to look into what might be going on in your body rather than just pushing through it or practicing in a hot room so that you don't have to feel those warning signals. That doesn't seem like a good idea, does it? So one of the main reasons that yogis do get injured is instability and weak muscles. So I guess maybe that's two causes, but it usually coincides. Instability in the joints and weakness in the muscles. And, yogis are hardly ever overly strong, right? They don't tend to be stronger than they need to be. We're moving our body weight around, which is a great opportunity to get stronger. But when we're just focusing on stretching, which I think is kind of the whole purpose of a hot practice largely, is so we can stretch more and more and more, and we don't feel any resistance to the stretching. We're just going to make our joints more unstable and our muscles weaker because, as we've said, you cannot contract your muscles hard enough to actually get them stronger. So I think that's a big issue. So now let's talk about what's going on in the tissue themselves. We looked at the circulatory system, nervous system, and muscular as a system. Let's talk about the tissue. The two main tissues involved here are the muscle tissues and the connective tissues. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds of connective tissues, but we can also talk about them in this general way as well. So in muscles, a hot practice is going to increase your stretch receptivity, right? It just means that your muscles get used to being stretched and they don't put up a fight, right? Like that's that reduction in proprioception, which is my next point here. Decrease proprioception. So your muscle spindles, which are in the muscles and monitoring the lengthening and shortening of your muscle, they're just going to be less sensitive in a hot class. So they're not going to stop you. So that means your muscles are more receptive to being stretched. Stretch receptivity is all well and good in the proper situation, but not in all situations. It's also going to increase your fatigue rate. Muscle tissue in a hot practice fatigues quicker. You're using up your energy resources quicker, and you're going to have an increase in waste products. Means that, your lymphatic system is going to have a bit more work to do. Kidneys, liver, etc. You're producing more free radicals from that type of practice. I'll try and include a link to an article about that in the notes below. So it also just, again, how does that play out? This list here I made about effects on muscles. Well, it just makes it more difficult to build your strength. I've mentioned this numerous times already. Makes it difficult to improve your balance, right? Because you're just not turning on the muscles and you're not proprioceptively as sensitive. It's going to, your recovery from the practice is going to, there being more recovery necessary. And you'll have to do a bit more work to restore your energy reserves and clear waste products. So, that might not sound all that detrimental. We're going to look at the connective tissues next. So what about room temperature yoga? Well, what's the effect of that? So if we're going to complain about the effects on hot yoga, what about room temperature yoga? How does that compare to a hot practice? And let's look at the temperature difference here first of all. So hot yoga, we're going to say, we'll give it a range, right? About 30 to 40 degrees Celsius or about 86 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the hot yoga range. Room temperature or warm yoga is about 22 to 30 degrees Celsius. So we're just getting up against that low range for hot yoga there. So I would call that warm yoga. I even feel that 30 degrees Celsius is a bit too warm for the effects I would be looking for, but some people tolerate it well, so we'll leave it at that. And that would bring us in that like 72 to 86 degree Fahrenheit range. Okay, so that's what we're talking about now. In a room temperature or a warm room, not a hot room, you're going to create heat internally by your working muscles. Now, this is going to be, you'll create much more internal heat because your muscles have access to the blood. It's not getting all shunted toward the skin and the vital organs. So you're going to have resources available for your working muscles so they can contract harder and they can work more. Okay. So that they're going to be more proprioceptively sensitive. You will increase your stretch receptivity though, right? Because you're heating your muscles from inside, and movement alone would increase stretch receptivity. So just in case you had the idea in your mind that you need heat to improve stretch receptivity, that is not true. There are many, many ways to increase stretch receptivity. One is just movement of any kind almost. But also isometric contraction, which we do a lot of in yoga. Well, I certainly do a lot of in yoga and activated asana. You could do things like contract, relax, or active inhibition techniques and things like that. That would all improve stretch receptivity. What that does is really prepare your muscles and receptors for lengthening, okay, for taking your joints into a greater range of motion. So you're doing preparation. And so, you would actually increase your proprioception. So I talk about fascial priming in, now that's not muscle necessarily, but there is a muscular component to priming the body with movement so that when you get into balancing postures or more complex postures, you have more neuromuscular information available. And so your body tends to be able to balance with a little bit more ease. It takes longer to fatigue in a room temperature or warm room. The fatigue does not set in nearly as early. You don't deplete your energy reserves as quickly or produce as many waste products in a regular temperature or warm room. You see, like, even though in a hot class, it seems like you're working so much harder, the work is in cooling the body and making sure your vital organs don't shut down. It's not in working your muscles. You see the difference? So, in a warm or room temperature room, that environment facilitates building strength. Now, if you want to build strength, right? And if you are providing enough stimulus to build strength, again, just by virtue of being in a cooler room doesn't mean you're automatically building strength. But if that is a goal, you can certainly access that level of stimulation if you want, without fatigue setting in too early for you to actually get to that threshold. I might be being a little too technical here, but I hope that makes sense. If you can work your muscles harder like you can in a cooler room, then you have a better chance of building your strength and building muscle. Improving overall proprioception, right? Just based on your nervous system developing better neuromuscular pathways because you've got more sensory information available. So you can develop a more efficient pathway for balancing and things like that. Some of the more complex postures we go into. You tend to maintain energy throughout the practice. You conserve your energy reserves, and there's less waste to clear. So that's kind of what's going on in muscle tissue. Okay. Let's look at the effect of hot yoga on connective tissues now. Hot yoga on connective tissue. So, yes, you're going to stimulate the thixotropic effect. So this might be something you are aware of. You'll definitely feel this effect if you weren't familiar with the term. So the thixotropic effect of connective tissue means it's able to change state. It's the ground substance in connective tissue. So connective tissue is on a very basic level made of protein fibers, collagen and elastin and a few others. And ground substance. And then there are cells depending on the connective tissue, et cetera. But the ground substance is kind of the substance in which it's sort of a gel-like substance that holds the connective tissue. Depending on how much fiber it has and how organized it is going to have very different characteristics. But the ground substance has this property called thixotropy, and it's able to change states. And heat, load, and time are some of the things that would help it change from a more gel-like firm state to a more liquidy state. And in the more liquidy state, it makes your tissues feel more pliable and stretchy. And, we like that feeling. It makes movement feel easier. There's less resistance, etc. So you can definitely get that effect in a hot class. But you can also get that effect with internally generated heat. So in a practice that's in a room temperature or warm room, again, because in that case, the heat is going to more come from your body, internally generating heat, that is also going to cause that change in state. And we know that, right? Because I'm sure you've had practices in a cool or room temperature room or slightly warm room where you feel like a little bit more stiff at the beginning of the practice, but halfway through you've realized that you feel quite different. There's not nearly as much resistance in your body, etc. Because you've been moving, because you've been generating heat, because you are increasing that thixotropic effect. So that is, you're able to do that in a warm or just room temperature room, creating internally generated heat, and there's no loss of proprioceptive sensitivity. It tends to enhance it, and so that's what I call fascial priming. So we talked about fascial priming in terms of muscles just a moment ago, but fascial priming in terms of the connective tissue, well, your connective tissue is where a lot of your mechanoreceptors or proprioceptors are housed, right? So these are the receptors that tell you where you are in space and help you coordinate your movements and feel your movements, feel your body, so that they are housed in the connective tissue, and they actually become more sensitive when you tension them through movement and isometric contraction. Again, the brain, muscle, connective tissue, interdependent type of action, right? Which movement is. We don't get that when we're sitting in postures like in a passive stretch or something. It would be in movement where all the systems are involved intricately. Okay, so, we'll compare that with extreme heat. Imposed heat from the outside is going to sedate those proprioceptors rather than stimulating them. So you're not going to get that improvement in the sensory information that is available. It's kind of like your sensory system is drunk. Now, thixotropy, like who doesn't love that thixotropy effect, right? We all love when our body is warmed up and we just feel more pliable and everything. But when you couple that with reduced proprioceptive sensitivity, now you have an increased risk of injury. Now, I hope that makes sense to you. So yes, you have changed the state of your connective tissues. The connective tissues are, they're more, I don't know, melty or something. They're just more pliable. And if you couple that with less resistance from proprioceptors, like from muscle spindle firing, now, what is to stop you from pushing your joints too far? Nothing really. So they're not going to help you accurately assess the safety of your joints. I'm just going to leave that a little pause there. So it's kind of like you're already making the tissue a little bit more vulnerable just by changing the state of the connective tissue ground substance. And you're layering on top of that sort of a dumbing down of your warning system that would tell you you're going too far. So, in extreme conditions, your melty connective tissues, especially, if you think about the cartilage type tissue of the hip and shoulder labia, those can be easily compromised by going into degrees of range of motion they have not been prepared for. So this is the thing. Like, I think, a lot of times yoga is more of a performance, less of a preparation for performance. So, if we focus a lot more on preparation, then we can also, avoid an injury. But again, that's a very intentional thing that you would need to be doing. And again, like, as I said, maybe you're going to keep doing your hot practice, but, just be aware of this as a possible mechanism of injury. So you're not pushing yourself too far, and you're actually trying to prepare your body for these positions a little bit better. All right. Otherwise, yeah, you're just setting yourself up for a gradual onset injury. And I'll tell you a quick story. Like, this is how it goes. I'm actually describing a real life story here. So this girl, young woman, already rather bendy woman, used to take hot yoga at a studio that I was teaching at. And I actually taught myself a few hot classes. And then I decided right away, like, yeah, this is way too hot for me. I personally experienced quite a lot of adrenal fatigue teaching in a hot class and practicing in a hot class. And I also seemed to get a lot of upper respiratory illness doing that too. But that's just me. But this girl used to take my hot classes. And when I finally decided, yeah, I'm not teaching hot anymore, I'll teach warm or room temperature, she continued taking hot practices. A lot of them were yin practices too. So she's taking these practices, and all of a sudden, she's gone from the studio for quite a while, like 2 or 3 months. And then she shows up and she's like, yeah, I can practice again. I'm like, oh, well, what happened? She wasn't taking my classes anyway, but I just saw her at the studio. And she said, yeah, I injured my hip and SI joints. I had to, go to physical therapy for a while. But they said, I'm fine now. And so I can go back to practice. So she goes back to hot practice. And it literally took her a couple of weeks. And then she had to be off again in getting physical therapy again. She went through this cycle several more times before she realized that she was destabilizing her hip and SI joint in her hot practice. Because, you don't see the direct connection between that. And, here's the thing, you go away, you take the hot practice, feels fine in the moment, you survive it, right? You take your shower, you're like, yes, I survived another hot practice. And then, couple days later, you're feeling kind of like this tweak in your SI joint or your hip and doesn't feel good. You know what's going to make me feel better? I got to go back to my hot practice. You go back to your hot practice. Everything feels better in the hot class, of course, because your proprioceptors are less sensitive. And, you feel again, a couple days later, oh, that stiffness is back. I better I've got to keep practicing these hot practices so I feel better, right? But you feel better in the class, but not so good later. And then if you keep repeating the cycle, you see you're giving your body the exact stimulus that is pushing it further and further into instability, and then eventually a situation where you just literally can't move. Okay, so could be you could end up with an acute injury or just a destabilized joint or whatever, and that is going to stop you in your tracks. So again, like if students could recognize the signs earlier, but I think even most teachers don't know that, and certainly studio owners, they don't realize like what those sensations that their students might be feeling in their body, what does that mean? Because they go back to hot practice and it feels fine, but later they pay the price. So, again, there's good reasons why you would not pick up on that. And, you need to be aware of it. It's just so important. Okay. So that's my story about that. So, well, what is the ideal temperature for yoga then? Based on what we've learned about the effects of extreme heat on the body systems and tissues, we can say the typical hot practice, which would be, again, typical hot practice, 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, or something, in a range around there. We've looked at the claims, right? It does not deliver on the claims that are made about it. It can't possibly, because of the effect that it's having on the tissues and systems. It doesn't get the results most people are looking for, right? People are looking for something that's going to make them feel stronger. They do want to feel better in their body. They want better balance. They want better coordination and control, right? They want to lose fat. They want to maintain a healthy body weight. They want to detoxify their body, but they're going to have to do it in some other way. Okay, but those are the results people are hoping for. But, they're not going to get them in hot yoga. And many injuries do result from that. And again, the thing is, like, as teachers and studio owners, like, are you even aware of the students who are getting injured? Because a lot of times they just go away and they don't come back, so you may never know. So the ideal temperature, again, just based on our information for yoga practice, is warm, which we would say is ranging from room temperature, Again, that's about 22 degrees Celsius, 72 degrees Fahrenheit, to very warm, which would be about 30 degrees Celsius to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere in that range. And, obviously certain students are going to have their preference within that range. But that range allows for benefits in tissue pliability. So you're going to get that thixotropic effect because you're able to work your muscles. You're not going to get a loss of proprioception or contractile strength. And in other words, you'll be able to, have active loading capacity. That is what you need to get some of the benefits you're actually looking for. And that is just therefore safer and more effective. Okay. It's not just about safety. This is about efficacy. Effectiveness, we'll say, and efficiency. And it enables your students to practice at a level that can cause adaptation. So, again, adaptation is a very important concept for teachers and studio owners to understand. If you do not understand what causes adaptation and what that looks like and how long it takes and all of that, you just really have nothing to base your decisions on. So, I think, again, this is an area where we need to be better educated as yoga teachers, because as movement teachers, we need to understand what our movements are going to do in the body and what's the outcome. And again, like, how long does that take? And is that good for us, etc. So is hot yoga good for anyone? All right. Well, I guess hot yoga is good for anybody who wants to do it and is well aware of all the things that they should be aware of. But I would say, like, if there is a population that hot yoga might be good for, would be, athletes, especially like maybe speed athletes or bodybuilders or something like that, because they find that they don't always train within their full range of motion, which I think is a problem. It's not good for them. They should be using their full range of motion. They tend to have much more fibrous connective tissue, so it's unlikely that they would injure themselves in hot practice, except, they'd still be dealing with those conditions of like lower proprioception. In their case, though, doing things that take their muscles to their full length, so we'll call that stretching, for a lack of a better term to use right now. That's often quite painful for them. So they appreciate the dumbing down of their proprioceptors, and again, they're a little less likely to cause an injury with that just because they have such fibrous connective tissue, but I'm not ruling it out because it's still possible. Also, they're not trying to build strength in the practice. They're just trying to probably relax and do something that's more full range. So, perceived exertion isn't really like a factor for them because they're not there to that's kind of not their pinnacle practice, if you will. But again, I think everybody should know, regardless of what kind of movement you're into, that the way to maintain your range of motion is to use it. Okay. Use your full range of motion. Do activities, do practices that allow you to use your full range of motion, because if you don't, you'll lose it, right? It's use it or lose it. Use your full range of motion or you will lose your full range of motion. So that's an important thing to remember. Make sure you're taking your joints through their full range of motion. I'm not saying stretching. I'm actually talking about range of control, or take your joints through the range that you have control over on a regular basis. Stretching is not going to maintain your range of control for you. Okay. There's actually a big gap between your passive range and your range of control. And you are in danger in the gap between those 2 points. So I'm talking about maintaining your range of control, your active range of motion that you have control over. That's what you need to use so you don't lose it. And everybody, this guy here, the weight trainer or whatever, or a different kind of athlete or a yogi, that's what they should know. It's not about stretching. It's about using it. Accessing full range of motion. This is, okay, listen up here. Accessing your full range of motion, or say your passive range of motion, okay, wherever you can push yourself in under hot conditions, does not mean you can access that in a cold one. And you probably know that very well, because that's why you would do it in a hot room. So most of the benefits that like an athlete or someone like that, would be seeking could be had in a regular temperature, room temperature room or a warm class. And again, they would not lose proprioception, but they would benefit from the thixotropic effect, etc. So there's lots of reasons why a room temperature class or a warm class would be even better for somebody like that. But they are just less likely to injure themselves in a hot practice just because of their body type, and the way that they train just doesn't leave them quite as susceptible to it. So that's all I'll say about that. Who is hot yoga good for? I could talk about who it's the worst for, and that would be, of course, anyone who's sort of delicately built, who has very pliable connective tissues to begin with, has extraordinary range of motion, so perhaps hypermobility. Hot practice can be a total disaster for somebody like that, unless, again, they are very well educated and know their body very well, and are able to rein themselves in when they're tempted to push themselves into extreme joint positions. So why is hot yoga so popular? Well, number one, I feel like students don't have the information they need, and no one's bringing that to them. Nobody's talking really about these false marketing claims that just seem to be everywhere. Like, it's like if you say something enough times, people just start believing it. And that seems to be what happened here. Just the same marketing claims over and over and over and over again. And, people just believe it because they see it everywhere. I don't know. And then there's that old myth that sweating somehow equates to making gains. I think a lot of people believe like, oh yeah, I worked up a really good sweat, so that equals, lots of benefits for me. But, sweating alone, again, is just a cooling system. If you are sweating it out in a, not a situation, but an environment that is like extremely hot, you're simply not going to get to a level that is going to get you the gains that you think you might be getting. The other problem that I see is that it just takes years for detrimental outcomes to become apparent. So people, like I described that girl who was taking the hot yoga, like she just keeps coming back, to hot yoga because she thinks it's solving her problems, but it's actually the cause of the problem. So, it can take years for that to become apparent and to keep going through the same cycle that just leads you further into a hole. And then sometimes, like, again, that the only solution, because you've done that for years, is reconstructive surgery or joint replacement or something like that. And I know for a fact this happens because yoga teachers have shared their stories with me. And I know that is a real possibility. And many yoga teachers have been through it. So I'm not talking through my hat here. I think the yoga world needs to change. I think it's high time that we became much more interested in kind of clinical evidence, like what are the outcomes that we're seeing? Are we actually doing the things that we think we're doing when we teach a class? Are we actually getting the kind of benefits that we want to get for our students? And the reason our students are even coming to class, are they getting the benefits that they're coming for? We need to be better educated ourselves and better at educating our students. And I would love to see there be like studios where the culture of the studio is that the students are always learning new things about their body. They're always learning new ways of taking care of themselves, or, being able to do postures they've never done before, and just getting stronger and noticing that everything they do in their life just feels easier, and they just feel more efficient and strong and resilient in their life. I would just love to see yoga studios where that's the culture, rather than, people just showing up and hoping to get results that never really materialize. So, activated asana is all about educating students about their body and how to care for it and keep it strong and resilient as we age. And that's what I'm all about teaching teachers how to do. So that's all I'm going to talk about in terms of hot yoga. Who knows, there might have to be a sequel to this if I get lots of questions about it. But hopefully it gives you some perspective and fills in some of the gaps in your knowledge or awareness. And yeah, like leave comments below, look below for some links that I'll include to articles and some research on to support the story that I told you today. So hopefully you enjoyed that and you got a lot out of it. I would love to hear about it if you did. Thanks so much for listening, and look for more presentations like this from me. And I would love to hear what you would like me to talk about. That'd be super cool. And I would be more than happy to, to check that out. Okay. Thanks so much, guys. Bye for now.